Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
No.
Mr. President, I rise today with my colleague from Minnesota, Senator Smith, on a somber anniversary week for our state and for our country. 1 year ago, a horrific act of political violence took two Minnesotans from us who represented the best of our state, the best of us, Minnesota State Representative and our former Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, and her dear husband, Mark Hortman. This is them with their kids, with Colin and Sophie, who have been true to their memories since that date, grieving through the entire time, but always holding up their parents' memories. That same night, State Senator John Hoeven and his wife, Yvette, were also shot. Despite taking 9 bullets, as his wife, Yvette, took 8, John has courageously returned to the state Senate with a tireless dedication to improving the lives of Minnesotans. Melissa and Mark left behind a state in mourning, but their 2 incredible children, Colin and Sophie, rose through their grief and best captured their parents' legacy as they said, "The best way to honor our parents' memory is to do something, whether big or small, to make our community just a little better for someone else." And that's exactly what Minnesotans have done. Thousands lined up to pay their respects to the Hortmans at the state capitol, where Melissa was the first woman in Minnesota to lie in state. People planted trees to honor Melissa's efforts to strengthen urban and rural forests. Donations poured into helping Paws, the service dog nonprofit where the Hortmans volunteered and where their beloved Gilbert, who was also shot that night, was trained. The organization established the Hortmans Heroes Fund to train service dogs to help first responders and veterans with PTSD. Their dog, Gilbert, was actually going to be part of that program, and they trained their dog, but in the end, it was decided their dog was just too friendly to be part of the program in the end, and Melissa and Mark were happy to have him back, and he died with them that weekend. Minnesota stood up in their names for Gilbert, for their family, and mostly for Melissa and Mark, and we remember them. Our state has lost a lot this year. Just weeks after we lost Melissa and Mark, we were once again shaken to our core by a deadly mass shooting at Annunciation Catholic Church, and then the winter with 3,000 federal agents and the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Our state has been at the center of America's heartbreak, but we have also been at the center of its courage and its hope. No one exemplified our state's courage and hope more than Melissa. I wish everyone in this chamber knew Melissa. We treasured her in Minnesota. She is the epitome of what you want in a public servant, the epitome of someone who stood up for her neighbors. I first got to know her when we were both running for office around the same time, both with little kids, me for the county attorney's office, her for state legislature. We went door to door together, and even back then, it seemed like she knew every story and every family in her district. She left a lasting impact on each of us. And over her 20 years in the Minnesota State House, she left a lasting impact on our state. As minority leader and then speaker, Melissa always guided her caucus with conviction and a sense of humor. She was always there to support her colleagues, but she also wasn't afraid to call out the all-male card game taking place when they should have been on the floor debating. And after being chosen by her colleagues to be their speaker, the first thing she did for the State House was to get rid of the speaker's mute button, because Melissa always listened to her colleagues, and she said at the time, "I have a gavel, and a gavel is good enough for me." And with that gavel, Melissa became one of the most consequential and arguably the best speakers in the history of our state. Because of Melissa, all Minnesota students get a school lunch, so hunger doesn't stop them from learning and reaching their potential. Because of Melissa, Minnesota voters can cast a ballot in the way that works best for them, whether that's early voting, mail-in voting, or same-day registration. Because of Melissa, women in Minnesota can access reproductive care and continue to make their own decisions about their futures. And because of Melissa, who created the Minnesota Community Solar Program, which now bears her name, our state is a leader in clean energy and protecting the environment. She was a generational leader. She led with integrity and courage. She consistently reached across the aisle to make life better for Minnesotans. And her husband, Mark, he was compassionate, smart, kind. I've met so many people who worked with him at his workplace over the years and loved him just as much as the legislators loved Melissa. As we remember Melissa and Mark, we must also continue to address the significant increase in threats and acts of political violence we have seen across the country against people of both parties. I want to extend my gratitude to the local, state, and federal law enforcement officers who responded that night and who have continued to be there for our state. It was Melissa who once said that in politics, often the easiest thing for anyone to do is run to a microphone, sharpen their dagger, and see who has the best press conference. But what's excruciatingly difficult in all this high emotion is to get people to the table, she said, and to slog through the work that has to happen. She was right then, and her words hold true today. Each of us has a responsibility to bring more people to the table and to take on the hard work. Melissa and Mark met as volunteers, working to help kids in their community, and their dedication to serving others never wavered. In her wallet, in her purse, after she died, they found a prayer that she always carried by St. Francis of Assisi. It said this, it said, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." Mr. President, may we all be instruments of peace, just like Melissa. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Minnesota.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And I want to thank my colleague, Senator Klobuchar, who knew and loved and worked closely with Melissa for so many years. I know that this is a personal moment for her to think about the loss that we experience every day, not having Melissa with us, but also just being able to capture who she was as a person. And this really is a somber day for us. It is almost exactly a year since Melissa and Mark were assassinated at their home, along with the loss of their dog, Gilbert. The same night that John and Yvette Hoffman were also shot and thank God, survived. Mr. President, you probably can relate to this because I know every party in every state has a big party dinner, and it was kind of incredible for us because Melissa and Mark were shot in the wee hours after our big party dinner. And so we had all been together just hours before we lost them. And it was a horrifying act of targeted political violence that shocked our state and also transfixed the nation as law enforcement searched for the perpetrator of this horror, and we collectively searched for meaning in these senseless acts. And is it 1 year later? And in most ways, this loss still feels so fresh to all of us. This solemn anniversary, I know, will probably bring a fresh wave of opinions and think pieces trying to answer the questions of what Melissa's death means and where we go from here, what this says about the state of American politics, or what it might reveal about our fraying democracy. And I have to tell you honestly that I don't have answers to those weighty questions. But what I know is that today I want to remember my friend Melissa and how she really exemplified what it should mean to be in public service, to be a public servant. I love that Amy read that quote from St. Francis, because that was all about the value of being a servant in the cause of helping people's lives be better. Melissa was born in Fridley, Minnesota, which is a suburb of the Twin Cities. She was gifted, she was smart, she excelled because she worked really hard, not because anything was ever handed to her. And she really pretty much thought that any job that was worth doing is worth doing right. And that's the mantra that she carried with her, whether it was her first job making burritos to her last job leading Minnesota's House through a dramatic and consequential legislative session. She felt a deep responsibility to put her talents to work in the cause of service. And you know, it's interesting, she started in public service as an intern in this very body. We have interns here on the floor today, so think about that, where this woman's life took her. She was an intern for Senator Al Gore and then Senator John Kerry, and then she decided to go to law school. And there she served the cause of justice in the state courts and as a prosecutor, where she fought against housing discrimination, and she won those cases. And then she decided to get involved in local politics. After volunteering on campaigns, she decided to run herself. And she actually ran for office twice before winning. So she was tenacious. She was not afraid to persevere even when she faced some headwinds, because she really believed that she had something to offer, yes, but that she also had a responsibility to help. Melissa and I got to know each other well when I was chief of staff to the governor of Minnesota, and she was coming into leadership in the State House. And you know, we all know well in this body, Mr. President, that writing and passing legislation is an incredibly rewarding activity. But it also can be tiresome and frustrating, and it takes a really long time, and it's inconvenient, and it can be pretty annoying too. So when you're in those moments, as Senator Klobuchar is saying, and you're trying to hash it out and work it out and get people to the table, you need somebody like Melissa there, because she knows how to get the job done. She would always be ready with a fresh idea about, like, what is it going to take to deliver a result here? And she also is really funny. She was quick with a quip and a funny joke to keep the process moving and to keep people focused on taking what they were doing seriously without taking themselves too seriously. I can tell you from personal experience that she also was pretty fun if you wanted to get together after all that work for a margarita. As a legislator and eventually as Speaker of the Minnesota House, Melissa approached her work in this way, by leading with compassion and respect, always staying in touch with our shared humanity, and of course she was unafraid to demand the same respect in return, both for herself and for others. She was a woman leader, a leader who was a woman in a time when, you know, sometimes even to this day, women are sort of not paid as much attention to as they deserve. And Amy was referring to this once on the House floor. Melissa called out a group of male legislators who were playing cards in the back room rather than paying attention to women legislators that were speaking on the floor about how a criminal justice bill was going to impact their communities. And so Melissa called them out, and I mean, they were pretty pissed. They were unaccustomed to being confronted by their rude behavior, and they actually demanded an apology. And Melissa's response was characteristically honest and simple. She said, "I'm really tired of watching women of color in particular being ignored, so I will not apologize." And this became kind of a thing. The next day, all over the Minnesota State Capitol, people were wearing T-shirts that says, "I will not apologize." It was quite a moment. Melissa stood up for others. She spoke truth to power, and she insisted that we treat each other with dignity and respect, because public service should be, you know, even in a climate like we are today, public service is serious business, unlike some of the non-serious activities that we see every day here in Washington. So here is Melissa's true legacy. Millions of Minnesotans are better off because Melissa Hortman did the work that she did. They have healthier drinking water because Melissa secured the funding that will eliminate lead water service lines in Minnesota. Minnesota school children will be able to focus on their learning. They won't be hungry because Melissa helped pass free breakfast and lunch for all Minnesota families with their kids in school. And starting this year, Minnesotans will have access to paid leave. Every Minnesotan will have access to paid medical and family leave to take care of their new babies, to take care of a loved one who might be ill, because Melissa never gave up on that project and believed that that should be something that everybody has. 1 year after her death, I still can't quite believe that she's gone. We had our big party dinner just last Friday night, and I kept looking around and wondering, forgetting that she wasn't there. And I know this fall, when I'm out door knocking, that I and a lot of people will be thinking about how she was always out there doing the organizing of politics. But today, I'm really focused on what Melissa and Mark meant to me and to all of us who had the privilege to know them. And my heart is with their family and their friends, and especially their children, Sophie and Colin. I know that they are comforted by the fact that so many people love Mark and Melissa so much. And I think that we would all do well to follow the advice of their children, Sophie and Colin. And when they were asked so many times in the days after Melissa and Mark were killed what people could do to help, this is what they told us. They said, if you would like to honor the memory of Mark and Melissa, please consider the following. Plant a tree. Visit a local park and make use of their amenities, especially a bike trail. Pet a dog. A golden retriever is ideal, but any will do. Tell your loved one a cheesy dad joke and laugh about it. Bake something, bread for Mark and a cake for Melissa, and share it with someone. Try a new hobby and enjoy learning something new. And stand up for what you believe in, especially if that thing is justice and peace. That is a good inspiration for all of us every single day. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to ask unanimous consent to pass two bills. S. 1377, my Theodore Roosevelt National Park Wild Horses Protection Act, and Senator Gallego's Cross-Boundary Wildfire Solutions Act. And I want to thank my colleague for joining me here today and for his work on this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support passage of these bills today. For generations, in the case of my bill, for generations, horses have been a living, breathing part of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. Their presence in the Badlands predates the establishment of the park itself and traces back to the region's early ranching heritage. Today, the horses remain one of the park's most recognizable and beloved features, enjoyed by more than 700,000 visitors annually when they come to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. But the horses are much more than just a visitor attraction. They're an important part of the historic landscape that reflects what Theodore Roosevelt himself experienced during his time in Dakota Territory. His years in the Badlands helped shape his character and inspired the conservation ethic that would later define his presidency. He was a rancher, so he was on horseback all of the time, and he really credits North Dakota and that experience for rounding out his strength and vitality, some of the attributes that he needed to go on and be elected president. As a result, the horses of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park have become an enduring symbol of that legacy. Yet, despite their importance, there have been repeated efforts to remove them from the park, including as recently as 2022. Each and every time, those efforts were met with overwhelming public opposition, not just from people in North Dakota, but from people across the country who recognize the contribution the horses make to the park's incredible, colorful history. That is why we've introduced this legislation. S. 1377 provides a balanced, common sense, and durable solution. It ensures the National Park Service will continue to manage a healthy horse herd while providing permanent protection for an important part of the park's identity. Specifically, the bill directs the National Park Service to maintain a herd of not fewer than 150 horses, a population level consistent with the need for responsible management of a genetically diverse herd. I greatly appreciate my colleague from Virginia, Senator Kaine, for joining me in introducing and sponsoring this legislation. Senator Kaine understands firsthand the important role of the wild ponies of Chincoteague and Assateague Islands on federal lands in his own state. I also appreciate the support from the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service and their willingness to provide certainty for the future of horses in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. This bill is about ensuring that future generations can experience the same landscape that helped shape one of our nation's greatest conservation leaders. By passing this bill, we can ensure the future of wild horses at the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I'd also like to thank Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, and the Energy Committee staff for their work in helping us advance this important legislation. I'm also pleased to work with Senator Gallego to pass his Cross-Boundary Wildfire Solutions Act today and appreciate his partnership. Therefore, as if in legislative session, I ask that unanimous consent that the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of S. 1377 and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the following bills en bloc. Calendar number 430, S. 2033, and S. 1377.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 430, S. 2033, a bill to direct the Comptroller General of the United States to conduct a study on existing programs, rules, and authorities that enable or inhibit wildfire mitigation across land ownership boundaries on federal and non-federal land. S1377, a bill to ensure the maintenance of a herd of horses in Theodore Roosevelt National Park and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measures en bloc? Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measures en bloc.
I further ask unanimous consent that the committee reported substitute amendment to S 2033 be agreed to. The bills as amended, where amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, all en bloc.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, again, I want to thank my colleague, Senator Gallego, and turn to him for his comments and yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator. I rise today to mark an important step in the fight against wildfires, the passage of my Cross-Boundary Wildfire Solutions Act. Like many Western states, my home state of Arizona is a patchwork of federal, state, tribal, and private land. And fires do not stop at property lines. That's why we need an all-hands-on-deck approach to reduce wildfire and improve wildfire mitigation across land ownership lands, no matter who owns that land. When fires move faster than governments can coordinate, the fire has the advantage. The Cross-Boundary Wildfire Solutions Act takes a practical step to fix that. The bill supports the kind of collaboration between federal, state, tribal, and local partners that we know works. By studying and identifying the gaps in current federal rules that present coordination between land ownership boundaries, we can bolster our firefighting efforts. This couldn't be more timely. The West is getting hotter and drier every year. In Arizona, we watch more than 200,000 acres burn across north rim of the Grand Canyon and Kaibab National Forest. The Dragon Bravo fire, one of the largest in Arizona history, devastated iconic landscapes and the local businesses that depend on them. In the face of these conditions, it is vital we have the research and coordination tools to ensure effective wildfire management. At the same time, funding for the Forest Service state, tribal, and private forestry program is at risk. That's the funding that enables exactly the kind of cross-boundary collaboration this bill is designed to work with. Congress needs to send a signal that we know this work matters, and we have the chance to do so today. As we approach peak wildfire season, I have heard from people on the ground that cross-boundary collaboration is a top priority to keep our fire seasons from growing more dangerous and more expensive. And they are right. The cost of inaction in lives and land and dollars keeps climbing. So thank you, Senator Hoeven and his team for helping me lead this effort. And today, we take a very important step in that direction. I yield back.
The senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, also known as FISA, is a critical national security tool. Well over half of every item in the President's daily brief is derived from Section 702. It has stopped terrorist attacks. It's stopped the flow of deadly drugs into our country. It's protected our troops overseas. It's allowed us to rescue troops overseas. Regrettably, the Democrats, led by the two minority leaders, are going to allow this critical authority to expire tomorrow night. Again, this program, which has been on the books for almost 20 years, is one of the most important intelligence tools that we have. And why are they going to let it expire? I guess the minority leader is mad about who Donald Trump chose to run an intelligence agency on an acting basis. An agency, by the way, that has very little to do with Section 702. To the extent it does, legislation I proposed with Senator Warner and other leaders in this Senate would impose more guardrails on that agency. And by the way, if the law expires tomorrow night, all the guardrails on that and every other agency expire as well. So even though we haven't been able to pass the legislation that Senator Grassley and I co-authored with Senator Warner and others, the responsible next step is to have a short-term extension of this legislation, especially as we begin welcoming literally millions of foreigners to this country for the World Cup and for the America 250 celebrations right around the corner. If we don't extend it for at least a few weeks while we continue to try to work on our differences, the consequences could be severe. The consequences, to be frank, could be fatal. Americans should not have to face that risk because of partisan game playing by the minority leader of the Senate and the House. So, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask for unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the bill at the desk. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
The right to object.
The senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reserving the right to object is particularly relevant here because I'm sure my colleague is aware that the bill, the 3-week bill, was just defeated in the House on a strong bipartisan vote this morning. So the House is not back until the 23rd, so my understanding is you can't do anything. Bipartisan majorities in both the House and the Senate have now rejected what I consider to be the surveillance status quo. And I believe there just have been too many abuses of Americans' rights across multiple administrations, and members of Congress are now standing up and saying no more. The only viable path forward is one that leads to real reforms. The Congress has already punted on Section 702 twice this year. Every day that 702 is in effect without reforms is a day that Americans' rights are under threat. I believe Americans deserve new guardrails. If Congress is going to extend these authorities, and that is what we're talking about, those guardrails are essential. And at a minimum, Americans deserve transparency about how these surveillance powers have been abused. For those reasons, Mr. President, I object.
Heard. The senator from Arkansas.
Into that fog of misunderstanding and misleading statements. Section 702 does not surveil Americans. It is, to put it simply, about foreigners in foreign countries. So, say, an IRGC leader in Iran talking to one of his operatives in Lebanon, or a Russian in Moscow talking to a Russian in Mexico, all of whom are usually up to no good. The government is not permitted to use Section 702 to target Americans, either here or in other countries. It's called Section 702 because, as is usually the case, laws have other sections to them. Like Title I has sections of the law that govern any targeting of an American. And those sections require a probable cause warrant, which is the Senator from Oregon's great crusade. So-called reverse targeting of Americans using Section 702 is prohibited. Requiring a probable cause warrant for this information is akin to requiring a police officer to get a new warrant every time he goes into the evidence room to review lawfully collected evidence. Now, for all the talk about transparency and oversight and privacy protections, I would point out that the legislation I've introduced has more than a dozen additional measures to include, for instance, criminal penalties for any abuse, to include more congressional involvement in the FISA court's processes, more reporting to the committees on which the Senator from Oregon sits. Just like the law we passed 2 years ago had many additional transparency measures and privacy protections. And as I pointed out, if this law is allowed to expire tomorrow night, so do all those transparency measures and all those privacy protections. So it's regrettable that we've reached this point, Mr. President. I just hope that the American people don't pay the consequences for the Democrats' reckless intransigence. I yield the floor.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, again, like yesterday, I'm making what I believe is a real offer now. I'm offering again to extend Section 702 of FISA for 5 weeks and give the public more facts about how these surveillance powers have been abused. Defenders of the status quo seem to think that there's already enough transparency around government surveillance. So let me be very specific about what the bill that I'm now proposing would do. It would require more public disclosure about violations of our surveillance laws, including Section 702. It would require more public disclosure about warrantless searches targeting politicians, journalists, and religious leaders. This particular category of searches more than tripled in 2025, and the FBI has refused to explain why. It would require more public disclosure about warrantless surveillance of Americans outside of FISA, which the public knows virtually nothing about. And it would require the executive branch to redact and release a March 2026 FISA court ruling that found serious violations affecting Americans' rights. The executive branch is already required, Mr. President, to release this ruling eventually. The chairman and the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, in fact, asked them to release it by May 15th. But unfortunately, they just brushed off the chairman and the vice chairman's request. So as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S 4740. The bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
An objection.
Mr. President,
The senator from Arkansas.
all of these ideas are totally unworkable and also beside the point. The senator from Oregon has never voted for Section 702. He is an implacable ideological opponent of this law. These measures, too, are for what? A 5-week extension that he would then extend permanently? It doesn't sound like a very reasonable offer to me. But almost every one of them is designed to make this program unworkable and to expose Americans to grave risk. There are already, again, dozens of transparency measures and privacy protections in place under a law passed just 2 years ago by a Democratic Senate, signed by a Democratic president, the legislation that Senator Grassley and I voted with another, or drafted with another Democratic senator, the vice chairman of my committee, the Intelligence Committee, has nearly 24 more. It is never enough for the senator from Oregon. So perhaps the minority leader of the Senate and the House will eventually come to their senses and vote to support legislation that key leaders in their party have drafted to protect this country. But it will never be enough for the senator from Oregon. So I, of course, object.
Is heard. The senator from Oregon.
Just very briefly on this last point, the proposals I made yesterday and the proposals I made today are longer than anything else on offer, 5 weeks. And I think that's the relevant fact. I yield back.
Senator from Arkansas.
5-week extension for permanent, radical, unworkable reforms. That's a farce.
Mr. President, what the senator from Arkansas and the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee just said is absolutely accurate. The senator from Oregon has consistently tried to kill this program and has never believed in it, has never voted for it. And it is a program that makes Americans more safe. That is a proven fact. You ask any intelligence expert, any military planner in this country, the intelligence derived from the 702 program is something that has saved American lives in theaters of conflict, from preventing terrorist attacks, preventing drug runners from getting drugs into this country. 90% of the fentanyl disruptions coming into this country were stopped because of this program. This is a program that saves American lives. And I have to ask the question, I can't for the life of me figure out why the Democrats continue to support policies that make this country less safe. TSA agents, I think this year, have worked without pay for almost as much time as they've worked with pay. Because Democrats have wanted to shut the government down, shut TSA down. More recently, Border Patrol, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, two agencies that are critical to keeping this country safe. They don't want to provide a single dollar, $0 for ICE and CBP, making this country less safe. And so what did we have to do? We had to use reconciliation to do something that ought to be a no-brainer around here. Protecting the American people, keeping our borders secure, protecting people in our communities in this country from criminal illegal aliens. I just don't understand this. And now this, blocking something that was negotiated on a bipartisan, bicameral basis, House and Senate. Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, his Democrat counterpart, same thing on the House side. With reforms, a lot of reforms, something negotiated in a bipartisan way to get a bill on the floor that we could use to extend this program and continue to keep Americans safe. Mr. President, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee made some public statements earlier today, and one was that having this shut down is obviously a high-risk proposition. That's a quote. And went on to say that he believes it's dangerous for Section 702 to lapse. And what this is all about is a temporary acting position at DNI. So Democrats have decided to block vote against something that many in the past have supported that's keeping this country safe because they don't like the person that President Trump is putting into a temporary acting role. These aren't linked. This is a program that works and works effectively to keep Americans safe. and the reforms that have been proposed, the legislation that's been agreed upon by Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, ought to be able to pass the United States Senate. 100% of the President's intelligence priorities are informed by the 702 collection. 100%. I don't get it. I just don't get it. So what I'm going to do, Mr. President, is suggest, because this acting temporary person doesn't even get into the acting temporary position until a week from tomorrow, June the 19th, I'm going to suggest that we do at least a one-week extension to keep the lights on at this agency. At a time when we're hosting the World Cup, we got 250th anniversary celebrations going on around this country. This is a time of risk for the American people. Now, the Democrats here in the Senate are, well, sorry, we don't like this guy in the acting temporary position, and so we're going to shut the lights off on this program and put at risk the American people. It's an untenable, irresponsible position. But since he doesn't take that position until a week from Friday, I think we ought to at least extend this program through a week from Friday and allow for some more time for people to figure out the long-term solution, if there is one. So, Mr. President, I'm going to ask that, as if in legislative session, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the bill at the desk. I will further ask that that bill be considered, read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Objection. The senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the Majority Leader, knows, the bill that came up in the House had a strong bipartisan vote this morning. It was not something that one party simply tried to jam something through on the other. It was a strong bipartisan vote. It was defeated. The House is gone until the 23rd, so they can't do anything. Now, with respect to a couple of the details made by the Majority Leader, I've already indicated that on offer is my proposal, which is longer than anything that has come up in the last day. It's a real offer. And by the way, it's not changing any surveillance powers at all. All my proposal does is offer some transparency. And I think transparency information is relevant when there's been evidence of Americans being spied on. And I think that's why it's important. So for those reasons, Mr. President, I object.
Again, say for the record, Mr. President, because the senator from Oregon's proposal is designed to kill the bill. And there was a vote in the House, and I want to say there were 190 Republicans in the House who voted for a 3-week extension, and there would have been a lot of Democrats if they hadn't been told by their leadership, like they have been told here, not to vote for an extension. This is an extension. This is an extension of current law. We have a proposal that's been negotiated by both sides. It will be a longer-term extension. So if you're rejecting the 3-week extension, what I'm suggesting here, and what you just objected to, because my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, that the reason all the Democrats went south on this in both the Senate and the House was because the nomination of a gentleman named Bill Pulte to be the acting temporary director of the Office of National Intelligence. If that's true, and if he doesn't take office until a week from Friday, what objection could there possibly be to extending this program's authority until at least next Friday, so that we don't have a period where this program lapses, this program goes dark at a time when there are literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to this country for the World Cup? 1 week extension. That's all we're saying. And the Democrats are going to object to that. So, Mr. President, again, I will simply say, this is on its face an irresponsible position that makes America and Americans less safe.
Senator from Ohio.
I'll make my remarks very, very brief. For those watching on TV, wondering what their government did this week, what you just witnessed on the floor of the United States Senate is one Democrat that at least was willing to have his position stated. The other one's hiding because they know what they did today was so wrong. At the end of the day, the most important job we have is to protect the American people. And because of Democrat political posturing, they made this country less safe. And I hope and pray to God that nothing happens in this country where an American is killed, something happens to this nation as a result of what we just witnessed here today. This is another low point in the history of the United States Senate.
The senator from Ohio.
I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Smith nomination.
Without objection.
I ask previously scheduled roll call vote to commence.
Without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Justin D. Smith of Missouri to be United States Circuit Judge for the 8th Circuit, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Justin D. Smith of Missouri to be the United States Circuit Judge for the 8th Circuit shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Elsa Brooks, Mr. Armstrong, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks,